In this course, I'm going to take you from a complete beginner to building powerful no-code AI agents. I don't have any coding experience, and you don't need any either. In the past 8 months, I've made over $500,000 in revenue by building and teaching people how to build AI agents. In this video together, we're going to set up your 2-week free n8n trial. We're going to set up credentials together and walk through step-by-step builds. And by the end, you'll have over 15 AI automations ready to take advantage of this opportunity. All right, so here's a quick look at the high-level course agenda. Keep in mind, everything will be time-stamped below, so you can jump around to where you need, but I definitely recommend saving this for later. As you can see, this is extremely comprehensive, packed with a ton of value, so you can come back to this later when you want to explore different chapters. But what we're going to do is start off with talking about AI agents and the opportunity that we are all living in right now. Then we'll move into n8n foundations. I'll set up a free 2-week trial with you guys. I will talk about the UI, we'll get familiar with it, and go over some foundational knowledge you'll need. From there, we'll move into step-by-step workflows where we're actually using that knowledge and connecting to different integrations and setting up some pretty cool automations right away. Then we'll talk about APIs and HTTP requests. We'll set up a few common examples together, and you'll see it's not that difficult. Then moving into the back half of the course, we'll talk about AI agent tools and memory. We will discuss multi-agent architectures. I'll talk about prompting, do a live example, and some other cool tips that I want to share with you guys that could be helpful. We will look at webhooks, what those really mean, and then we'll look at a few example workflows where we've triggered them with webhooks. I'll talk about MCP servers, what that really is, and we'll do a step-by-step self-hosted setup of n8n and connect to some MCP servers. And finally, we'll close off with lessons from my first 6 months of building AI agents. So if that all sounds good to you guys, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so AI agents, artificial intelligence, whatever it is, there is definitely a lot of hype. There's no denying that. And so the purpose of this section is just to make sure we can cut through all of that and actually understand what is an AI agent at its core, what can they do, and why do we need them. You probably heard, digital employee or virtual assistant, all this kind of stuff, but we need to understand what that actually means and what powers them. So at this point, I'm sure we are all familiar with something like ChatGPT, which is a large language model at its core. And so what we're looking at right here is a very simple visualization of how a large language model works, meaning right here in green, we have a large language model, let's say it's ChatGPT, and we, the user, give it some sort of input. So maybe that's like, hey, help me write an email to John. The LLM would then take our input, process this, it would basically just create an email for us, and then it would spit that out as an output, and that's it. This LLM at its core cannot take any action. It's really not that practical. It just kind of helps you be more productive. Because at the end of the process, we'd have to take this output and copy and paste it into something that actually can take action, like Gmail. And so the power of these large language models really comes into play when we start to expose them to different tools. And tools just means any of these integrations that we use every single day within our work that let us actually do something. So whether that's send an email or update a row in our CRM or look at a database, or Airtable, whatever it is, even Outlook, that's a tool. It just means connecting to an actual platform that we use to do something. So now instead of having the LLM help us write an email that we would copy and paste, or us exporting a Google Sheet and giving it to an LLM to analyze, it can basically just interact with any of its tools that we give it access to. So when we add an LLM to tools, we basically can get 2 different things, and that is either an AI workflow or an AI agent. So right away, you can already tell what the difference is, but you can also see some similarities. So let's break it down. Starting with an AI workflow, we can see that we have an input, similar to like we did up top with our LLM. But now instead of just going input, LLM, output, we can work in those tools right into the actual AI workflow itself. So here is an example of what an AI workflow could practically look like. First of all, we have a tool, which is HubSpot, and that's going to be the input for this workflow. This will basically pass over a new lead that has been inserted into our CRM. Then we're hitting another tool, which is Perplexity, which helps us do research. So we're going to do research on that lead. From there, after we get that research, we're going to hit an LLM, which is where this whole AI-powered workflow terminology comes in, because we're using that LLM to then take the research, draft a personalized email, and then it can use another tool to actually send that email. And the reason that we do this as a workflow is because this is going to happen in the same 4 steps in that order every time. New lead comes in, research, write the personalized email, send the email. And so whenever we know a process is linear or sequential or it's going to follow that order every time, it's much, much better to do an actual workflow rather than send that off to an AI agent, where we have an input, we have the LLM, which is the AI agent, this is the brain of the whole operation, and it has access to all of the different tools it can use, and then it has an output. So yes, it is true that this AI agent down here could do the exact same job as this AI workflow. We could also over here with an AI agent get a new form and have a new row in our CRM. The agent could then think about it and decide, okay, I'm going to use Perplexity to do research, and then after that, I'm going to send an email with my email tool. But it's not the most effective way to do it because it's going to be more expensive, it's going to be slower, and it's going to be more error prone. So basically the whole idea is AI agents can make decisions and act autonomously based on different inputs. AI workflows follow the guardrails that we put in place. There's no way they can deviate off the path that we chose for them. So a big part of building effective systems is understanding, okay, do I need to build an AI workflow or am I going to build an AI agent? Is this process deterministic or non-deterministic? Or in other words, is it predictable or is it unpredictable? If something's unpredictable, that's when we're going to use an AI agent with a brain and with different tools to actually do the job, and that's where the whole autonomy comes into play. And I don't want to dive too deep into the weeds of this right now. We'll cover this later in a different section. But real quick, 4 main pros of AI workflows over AI agents: reliability and consistency, cost efficiency, easier debugging and maintenance, and scalability. Once again, we have a whole section dedicated to this idea, and we're going to dive into it after we've built out a few AI workflows. But I wanted you guys to understand this because obviously the whole purpose you probably came here was to learn how to build AI agents. But before we build AI agents, we're going to learn how to build AI workflows. It's the whole concept of crawl, walk, run. You wouldn't just start running right away. And trust me, after you've built out a few AI workflows, it's going to make a lot more sense when you hop into building some more complex agentic systems. But just to give you that quick fix of AI agent knowledge, and we'll revisit this later when we actually build our first agent together, what is the anatomy of an AI agent? What are the different parts that make one up? So here's a simple diagram that I think illustrates AI agents as simple as possible. We have an input, we have our LLM, and we have our output, like we talked about earlier. But then inside the AI agent, you can see 2 main things. We have a brain and we have instructions. So the first thing is a brain. This comes in the form of a large language model and also memory. So first off, the large language model, this is an AI chat model that we'll choose. Whether that's an OpenAI model or an Anthropic model or a Google model, this is going to be what powers the AI agent to make decisions, to reason, to generate outputs, that sort of stuff. And then we also have the memory. So this can come in the form of long-term memory as well as short-term memory, but basically we want to make sure that if we're conversating with our agent, it's not going to forget what we're talking about after every single sentence. It's going to retain that context window, and it can also remember things that we talked about a while back. And then the other piece is the instructions for the AI agent, which is also kind of referred to as a system prompt. And this is really important because this is telling this AI agent, here's your role, here's what you do, here are the tools you have. This is basically like your job description. So the same way you wouldn't expect a new hire to hop into the company and just start using its different tools and knowing what to do, you would have to give it basically some pretty specific training on this is basically your end goal, here are the tools you have, and here's when you use each one to get the job done. And the system prompt is different than the input, which is kind of referred to as a user prompt. And think of it like this. When you're talking to ChatGPT in your browser and every single message that you're typing and sending off to it is a user message because that input changes every time. It's dynamic. But the system prompt is typically going to stay the same over the course of this agent's life unless its role or actual instructions are going to change. But anyways, let's say the input is, hey, can you help me send an email to John? What's going to happen is the agent's going to use its brain to understand the input. It's going to check its memory to see if there's any other interactions that would help with this current input. Then it will look at its instructions and see, okay, how do I actually send an email to John? And then it will call on its tool to actually send an email. So at a high level, that is the anatomy of an AI agent, and I hope that helps paint a clear picture in your mind. Cool. So now that we've talked about what an AI agent is and what a workflow is and why we want to walk before we run, let's actually get into n8n and start building some stuff. All right, so before we dive into actually building AI agents, I want to share some eye-opening research that underscores exactly why you're making such a valuable investment in yourself today. This research report that I'm going to be walking through real quick will be available for free in my school community if you want to go ahead and take a look at it. It's got a total of 48 sources that are all from within the past year, so you know it's real, you know it's relevant, and it was completely generated for me using Perplexity, which is an awesome AI tool. So, just a year ago, AI was still considered experimental technology for most businesses. Now, it's become the core driver of competitive advantage across every industry and business size. What we're witnessing isn't just another tech trend, it's a fundamental business transformation. Let me start with something that might surprise you. 75% of small businesses now use AI tools. That's right, this isn't just enterprise technology anymore. In fact, the adoption rates are climbing fastest among companies generating just over $1 million in revenue at 86%. What's truly remarkable is the investment threshold. The median annual AI investment for small businesses is just $1,800. That's less than $150 per month to access technology that was science fiction just a few years ago. Now, I know some of you might be skeptical about AI's practical value. Let's look at concrete outcomes businesses are achieving. Marketing teams are seeing a 22% increase in ROI for AI-driven campaigns. Customer service AI agents have reduced response time by 60% while resolving 80% of inquiries without human intervention. Supply chains optimized with AI have cut transportation costs by 5 to 10% through better routing and demand forecasting. These are actual measured results from implementations over the past year. Now, for those of you from smaller organizations, consider these examples. Henry's House of Coffee used AI-driven SEO tools to improve their product descriptions, resulting in a 200% improvement in search rankings and a 25% revenue increase. Vanisec Insurance implemented custom chatbots that cut client query resolution time from 48 hours to just 15 minutes. Small businesses using Zapier automations saved 10 to 15 hours weekly on routine data entry and CRM updates. What's revolutionary here is that none of these companies needed to hire AI specialists or data scientists to achieve these results. The economic case for AI skills is compelling. 54% of small and medium businesses plan to increase AI spending this year. 83% of enterprises now prioritize AI literacy in their hiring decisions. Organizations with AI-trained teams are seeing 5 to 8% higher profitability than their peers. But perhaps most telling is this: small businesses using AI report 91% higher revenue growth than non-AI adopters. That gap is only widening. So the opportunity ahead. The truth is, mastering AI is no longer optional. It's becoming the price of entry for modern business competitiveness. Those who delay risk irrelevance, while early adopters are already reaping the benefits of efficiency, innovation, and market share gains. Now, the good news is that we're still in the early stages. By developing these skills now, you're positioning yourself at the forefront of this transformation and going to be in extremely high demand over the next decade. So let's get started building your first AI agent. All right, so here we are on n8n's website. You can get here using the link in the description. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and sign up for a free trial with you guys. And this is exactly the process you're going to take. And you're going to get 2 weeks of free playing around. And like I said, by the end of those 2 weeks, you're already going to have automations up and running and tons of templates imported into your workflows. And I'm not going to spend too much time here, but basically n8n just lets you automate anything. Any business process that you have, you can automate it visually with no code, which is why I love it. So here you can see n8n lets you automate business processes without limits on your logic. It's a very visual builder. We have a ton of different integrations. We have the ability to use code if you want to. Lots of native nodes to do data transformation, and we have tons of different triggers, tons of different AI nodes, and we're going to dive into this so you can understand what's all going on. But there's also hundreds of templates to get you started, not only on the n8n website itself, but also in my free school community. I have almost 100 templates in there that you can plug in right away. Anyways, let's scroll back up to the top and let's get started here with a new account. All right, so I put in my name, my email, password, and I give my account a name, which will basically be up in the top search bar. It'll be like nateherkdemo.app.n8n.cloud. So that's what your account name means. And you can see I'm going to go ahead and start our 14-day free trial. Just have to do some quick little onboarding. So it asks us what type of team are we on. I'm just going to put product and design. It asks us the size of our company. It's going to ask us which of these things do we feel most comfortable doing. These are all pretty technical. I just want to put none of them, and that's fine. And how did you hear about n8n? Let's go ahead with YouTube and submit that off. And now you have the option to invite other members to your workspace if you want to collaborate and share some credentials. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and skip that option. So from here, our workspace is already ready. There's a little quick start guide you could watch from n8n's YouTube channel, but I'm just going to go ahead and click on Start Automating. All right, so here we are. This is what n8n looks like, and let's just familiarize with this dashboard a little bit real quick. So up in the top left, we can see we have 14 days left in our free trial, and we've used 0 out of 1,000 executions. An execution just basically means when you run a workflow from end to end, that's going to be an execution. So we can see on the left-hand side, we have overview. We have like a personal set of projects. We have things that have been shared with us. We have the ability to add a project. We have the ability to go to our admin panel where we can upgrade our instance of n8n. We can turn it off, that sort of stuff. So here's my admin panel. You can see how many executions I have, how many active workflows I have, which I'll explain what that means later. We have the ability to go ahead and manage our n8n versions, and this is where you could kind of upgrade your plan and change your billing information, stuff like that. But you'll notice that I didn't even have to put any billing details to get started with my 2-week free trial. But then if I want to get back in my workspace, I'm just going to click on open right here, and that will send us right back into this dashboard that we were just on. Cool. So right here we can see we can either start from scratch, a new workflow, or we can test a simple AI agent example. So let's just click into here real quick and break down what is actually going on here. So in order for us to actually access this demo where we're going to just talk to this AI agent, it says that we have to start by saying hi. So there's an open chat button down here. I'm going to click on open chat and I'm just going to type in here, hi. And what happens is our AI agent fails because this is basically the brain that it needs to use in order to think about our message and respond to us. And what happens is we can see there's an error message. So because these things are red, I can click into it and I can see what is the error. It says error in subnode OpenAI model. So that would be this node down here, which is called OpenAI model. I would click into this node and we can basically see that the error is there is no credentials. So when you're in n8n, what happens is in order to access any sort of API, which we'll talk about later, but in order to access something like your Gmail or OpenAI or your CRM, you always need to import some sort of credential, which is just a fancy word for a password, in order to actually get into that information. So right here we can see there's 100 free credits from OpenAI. I'm going to click on claim credits, and now we just are using our n8n free OpenAI API credits, and we're fine on this front. But don't worry, later in this video I'm going to cover how we can actually go to OpenAI and get an API key and create our own password in here. But for now we've claimed 100 free credits, which is great. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and resend this message that says hi. So I can actually go to this hi text and I can just click on this button which says repost message, and that's just going to send it off again. And now our agent's going to actually be able to use its brain and respond to us. So what it says here is, welcome to n8n. Let's start with the first step to give me memory. Click the plus button on the AI agent that says memory and choose simple memory. Just tell me once you've done that. So sure, why not? Let's click on the plus button under memory and we'll click on simple memory real quick. And we're already set up, good to go. So now I'm just going to come down here and say done. Now we can see that our agent was able to use its memory and its brain in order to respond to us. So now it can prompt us to add tools, it can do this other stuff, but we're going to break that down later in this video. Just wanted to show you a real quick demo of how this works. So what I would do is up in the top right, I can click on save just to make sure that what we've done is actually going to be saved. And then to get back out to the main screen, I'm going to click on either overview or personal. But if I click on overview, that just takes us back to that home screen. But now let's talk about some other stuff that happens in a workflow. So up in the top right, I'm going to click on create workflow. You can see now this opens up a new blank page, and then you have the option up here in the top left to name it. So I'm just going to call this one demo. Now we have this new workflow that's saved in our n8n environment called demo. So a couple things before we actually drag in any nodes is up here you can see where is this saved. If you have different projects, you can save workflows in those projects. If you want to tag them, you can tag different things, like if you have one for customer support or you have stuff for marketing, you can give your workflows different tags just to keep everything organized. But anyways, every single workflow has to start off with some sort of trigger. So when I click on add first step, it opens up this panel on the right that says what triggers this workflow. So we can have a manual trigger, we can have a certain event like a new message in Telegram or a new row in our CRM. We can have a schedule, meaning we can set this to run at 6 a.m. every single day. We can have a webhook call, form submission, chat message like we saw earlier. There's tons of ways to actually trigger a workflow. So for this example, let's just say I'm going to click on trigger manually, which literally just gives us this button where if we click test workflow, it goes ahead and executes. Cool, so this is a workflow and this is a node, but this is a trigger node. What happens after a trigger node is different types of nodes, whether that's like an action node or a data transformation node or an AI node, some sort of node. So what I would do is if I want to link up a node to this trigger, I would click on the plus button right here, and this pulls up a little panel on the right that says what happens next. Do you want to take action with AI? Do you want to take action within a certain app? Do you want to do data transformation? There's all these other different types of nodes. And what's cool is, let's say we wanted to take action within an app. If I clicked on this, we can see all of the different native integrations that n8n has. And once again, in order to connect to any of these tons of different tools that we have here, you always need to get some sort of password. So let's say Google Drive. Now that I've clicked into Google Drive, there's tons of different actions that we can take, and they're all very intuitive. You know, would you want to copy a file? Would you want to share a file? Do you want to create a shared drive? It's all very natural language. And let's say, for example, I want to copy a file. In order for n8n to tell Google Drive which file do we want to copy, we first of all have to provide a credential. So every app, you'll have to provide some sort of credential. And then you have basically like a configuration panel right here in the middle, which would be saying, what is the resource you want? What do you want to do? What is the file? All this kind of stuff. So whenever you're in a node in n8n, what you're going to have is on the left, you have an input panel, which is basically any data that's going to be feeding into this current node. In the middle, you'll have your configuration, which is like the different settings and the different little levers you can tweak in order to do different things. And then on the right is going to be the output panel of what actually comes out of this node based on the way that you configured it. So every time you're looking at a node, you're going to have three main places: input, configuration, and output. So let's just do a quick example where I'm going to delete this Google Drive node by clicking on the delete button. I'm going to add an AI node because there's a ton of different AI actions we can take as well. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to OpenAI's kind of like ChatGPT. So I'll click on that, and I'm just going to click on message a model. So once that pulls up, we're going to be using our n8n free OpenAI credits that we got earlier. And as you can see, we have to configure this node. What do we want to do? The resource is going to be text. It could be image, audio, assistant, whatever we want. The operation we're taking is we want to just message a model. And then, of course, because we're messaging a model, we have to choose from this list of OpenAI models that we have access to. And actually, it looks like this n8n free credits only actually give us access to a chat model. And this is a bit different. Not exactly sure why, probably just because they're free credits. So what we're going to do real quick is head over to OpenAI and get a credential so I can just show you guys how this works with input, configuration, and output. So basically, you'd go to openai.com, you'd come in here and you'd create an account if you don't already have one. If you have a ChatGPT account and you're on like maybe the $20 a month plan, that is different than creating an OpenAI API account. So you'd come in here and create an OpenAI account. As you see up here, we have the option for ChatGPT login or API platform login, which is what we're looking for here. So now that you've created an account with OpenAI's API, what you're going to do is come up to your dashboard and you're going to go to your API keys, and then all you'd have to do is click on create new key, name this one whatever you want, and then you have a new secret key. But keep in mind, in order for this key to work, you have to have put in some billing information in your OpenAI account. So throw in a few bucks, they'll go a lot longer than you may think, and then you're going to take that key that we just copied, come back into n8n, and under the credential section, we're going to click on create new credential. All I had to do now was paste in that API key right there, and then you have the option to name this credential if you have a ton of different ones. So I can just say, like demo on May 21st, and now I have my credential saved and named. Because now we can tell the difference between our demo credential and our n8n free OpenAI credits credential. And now hopefully we have the ability to actually choose a model from the list. So as you can see, we can access ChatGPT 4.0 latest, 3.5 turbo, 4.1 mini, all this kind of stuff. I'm going to choose 4.1 mini, but as you can see, you can come back and change this whenever you want. And I'm going to keep this really simple. In the prompt, I'm just going to type in, tell me a joke. So now when this node executes, it's basically just going to be sending this message to OpenAI's model, which is GPT 4.1 mini, and it's just going to say, tell me a joke. And then what we're going to get on the output panel is the actual joke. So what I can do is come up right here and click on test step. This is going to run this node, and then we get an output over here. And as you can see, both with the input and the output, we have three options of how we want to view our data. We can click on schema, we can click on table, or we can click on JSON. And this is all the exact same data. It's just like a different way to actually look at it. I typically like to look at schema. I think it just looks the most simple and natural language. But what you can see here is the message that we got back from this OpenAI model was, sure, here's a joke for you. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. And what's cool about schemas is that this is all drag and drop. So now once we have this output, we could basically just use it however we want. So if I click out of here and I open up another node after this, and for now, I'm just going to grab a set node just to show you guys how we can drag and drop. What I would do is, let's say we wanted to add a new field, and I'm just going to call this OpenAI's response. So we're creating a field called OpenAI's response. And as you can see, it says drag an input field from the left to use it here. So as we know, every node we have input, configuration, output. On the input, we can basically choose which one of these things do we want to use. I just want to reference this content, which is the actual thing that OpenAI said to us. So I would drag this from here right into the value, and now we can see that we have what's called a variable. So anything that's going to be wrapped in these two curly braces and it's going to be green is a variable, and it's coming through as json.message.content, which is basically just something that represents whatever's coming from the previous node in the field called content. So we can see right here, json.message.content, we have message. Within message, we have basically a subfolder called content, and that's where we access this actual result, this real text. And you can see if I click into this variable, if I make it full screen, we have an expression, which is our JSON variable, and then we have our result, which is the actual text that we want back. So now, if I go ahead and test this step, we can see that we only get output to us OpenAI's response, which is the text we want. Okay, so this would basically be a workflow because we have a trigger and then we have our nodes that are going to execute when we hit test workflow. So if I hit test workflow, it's going to run the whole thing. And as you can see, super visual. We saw that OpenAI was thinking, and then we come over here and we get our final output, which was the actual joke. And now let me show you one more example of how we can map our different variables without using a manual trigger. So let's say we don't want a manual trigger. I'm just going to delete that. But now we have no way to run this workflow because there's no sort of trigger. So I'm just going to come back in here and grab a chat trigger just so we can talk to this workflow in n8n. I'm going to hook it up right here. I would just basically drag this plus into the node that I want. So I just drag it into OpenAI, and now these two things are connected. So if I went into the chat and I said hello, it's going to run the whole workflow, but it's not really going to make sense because I said hello and now it's telling me a joke about why don't scientists trust atoms. So what I would want to do is I'd want to come into this OpenAI node right here, and I'm just going to change the actual prompt. So rather than asking it to tell me a joke, what I would do is I'd just delete this. And what I want to do is I want OpenAI to go ahead and process whatever I type in this chat. Same way it would work if we were in ChatGPT in our browser and whatever we type, OpenAI responds to. So all I'd have to do that is I would grab the chat input variable right here. I would drag that into the prompt section. And now if I open this up, it's looking at the expression called json.chatInput because this field right here is called chat input. And then the result is going to be whatever we type anytime, even if it's different 100 times in a row, it's always going to come back as a result that's different, but it's always going to be referenced as the same exact expression. So just to actually show you guys this, let's save this workflow. And I'm going to say, my name is Nate. I like to eat ice cream. Make up a funny story about me. Okay, so we'll send this off, and the response that we should get will be one that is actually about me, and it's going to have some sort of element of a story with ice cream. So let's take a look. So it said, sure, Nate, here's a funny story for you. And actually, because we're setting it, it's coming through a little weird. So let's actually click into here to look at it. Okay, so here is the story. Let me just make this a little bigger. I can go ahead and drag the configuration panel around by doing this. I can also make it larger or smaller if I do this. So let's just make it small. We'll move it all the way to the left, and let's read this story. So it said, sure, Nate, here's a funny story just for you. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Nate who loved ice cream more than anything else in the world. One day, Nate decided to invent the ultimate ice cream. A flavor so amazing that it would make the entire town go crazy. So let's skip ahead to the bottom. Basically what happens is, from that day on, Nate's stand became the funniest spot in town, a place where you never knew if you'd get a sweet, savory, or plain silly ice cream. And Nate, he became the legendary ice cream wizard. That sounds awesome. So that's exactly how you guys can see. What happened was, in this OpenAI node, we have a dynamic input, which was us talking to this thing in a chat trigger. We drag in that variable that represents what we type into the user prompt, and this is going to get sent to OpenAI's model of GPT 4.1 mini because we configured this node to do so. And the reason we were able to actually successfully do that is because we put in our API key or our password for OpenAI. And then on the right, we get this output, which we can look at either in schema view, table view, or JSON view, but they all represent the same data. As you can see, this is the exact story we just read. Something I wanted to talk about real quick that is going to be super helpful for the rest of this course is just understanding what is JSON. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's just a way to identify things. And the reason why it's so important to talk about is because over here, right, we all kind of know what schema is. It's just kind of like the way something's broken down. And as you can see, we have different drill downs over here, and we have different things to reference. Then we all understand what a table is. It's kind of like a table view of different objects with different things within them, kind of like the subfolders. And once again, you can also drag and drop from table view as well. And then we have JSON, which also you can drag and drop. Don't worry, you can drag and drop pretty much this whole platform, which is why it's awesome. But this may look a little more codey or intimidating, but I want to talk about why it is not. So first of all, JSON is so important because everything that we do is pretty much going to be built on top of JSON. Even the workflows that you're going to download later when you'll see like, hey, you can download this template for free. When you download that, it's going to be a JSON file, which means the whole workflow in n8n is basically represented as JSON. And so hopefully that doesn't confuse you guys. But what it is it's literally just key value pairs. So what I mean by that is like over here, the key is index and index equals 0. And then we have like the role of the OpenAI assistant, and that's the key. And the value of the role is assistant. So it's very, very natural language if you really break it down. What is the content that we're looking at? The content that we're looking at is this actual content over here. But like I said, the great thing about that is that pretty much every single large language model, or like ChatGPT, Claude 3.5, they're all trained on JSON and they all understand it so well because it's universal. So right here on the left, we're looking at JSON. If I was to just copy this entire JSON, go into ChatGPT and say, hey, help me understand this JSON. And then I just basically pasted that in there. It's going to be able to tell us exactly like which keys are in here and what those values are. So it says, this JSON represents the response from an AI model like ChatGPT in a structured format. Let me break it down for you. So basically it's going to explain what each part of this JSON means. We can see the index is 0. That means it's the first response. We can see the role equals assistant. We can see that the content is the funny story about Nate. We can see all this stuff, and it basically is able to not only break it down for us, but let's say we need to make JSON. We could say, hey, I have this natural language. Can you make that into JSON for me? Hey, can you help me make a JSON body where my name is Nate, I'm 23 years old, I went to the University of Iowa, I like to play pickleball. We'll send that off. And basically, we'll be able to turn that into JSON for us. So here you go. We can see name, Nate, age 23, education, University of Iowa, interests, pickleball. And so don't let it overwhelm you. If you ever need help either making JSON or understanding JSON, throw it into chat and it will do a phenomenal job for you. And actually, just to show you guys that I'm not lying, let's just copy this JSON that chat gave us, go back into our workflow, and I'm just going to add a set field just to show you guys. And instead of manual mapping, I'm just going to set some data using JSON. So I'm going to delete this, paste in exactly what chat gave me, hit test step, and what do we see over here? We see the name of someone named Nate, we see their age, we see their education, and we see their interests in either schema, table, or JSON view. So hopefully that gives you guys some reassurance, and just once again, JSON's super important, and it's not even code. That is just a really quick foundational understanding of a trigger, different nodes, action nodes, AI nodes. You have a ton to play with, and that's kind of like the whole most overwhelming part about n8n is you know what you need to do in your brain, but you don't know maybe which is the best n8n node to actually get that job done. So that's kind of the tough part, is it's a lot of just getting the reps in, understanding what node is best for what, but I assure you by the time your 2-week trial is up, you'll have mastered pretty much all that. All right, but something else I want to show you guys is now what we're looking at is called the editor. So if you look at the top middle right here, we have an editor, and this is where we can, zoom out, we can move around, we can basically edit our workflow right here, and it moves from left to right, as you guys saw, the same way we read from left to right. And now, because we've done a few runs and we've tested out these different nodes, what we'll click into is executions. And this will basically show us the different times we've ran this workflow, and what's cool about this is it will show us the data that has moved through. So let's say you set up a workflow that every time you get an email, it's going to send some sort of automated response. You could come into this workflow, you could click on executions, and you could go look at what time they happened, what actually came through, what email was sent, all that kind of stuff. So if I go all the way down to this third execution, we can remember that what I did earlier was I asked this node to tell us a joke. We also had a manual trigger rather than a chat trigger, and we can see this version of the workflow. I could now click into this node and I could see this is when we had it configured to tell us a joke, and we could see the actual joke it told us, which was about scientists not trusting atoms. And obviously we can still manipulate this stuff, look at schema, look at table, and do the same thing on that left-hand side as well. So I wanted to talk about how you can import templates into your own n8n environment because it's super cool. And like I said, they're all kind of built on top of JSON. So I'm going to go to n8n's website and we're going to go to product and we're going to scroll down here to templates. And you can see there's over 2,100 workflow automation templates. So let's scroll down. Let's say we want to do this one with cloning viral TikToks with AI avatars. And we can use this one for free. So I'll click on use for free. And what's cool is we can either copy the template to clipboard, or since we're in the cloud workspace, we could just import it right away. And so this is logged into my my main cloud instance, but I'll still show you guys how this works. I would click on this button. It would pull up this screen where I just get to set up a few things. So there's going to be different things we'd have to connect to. So you would basically just select your different credentials if you already had them set up. If not, you could create them right here. And then you would just basically be able to hit continue. And as this loads up, you see we have the exact template right there to play with. Or let's say you're scrolling on YouTube and you see just a phenomenal Nate Herc YouTube video that you want to play around with. All you have to do is go to my free school community and you will come into YouTube resources or search for the title of the video. And let's say you wanted to play with this shorts automation that I built. What you'll see right here is a JSON file that you'll have to download. Once you download that, you'll go back into n8n, create a new workflow, and then when you import that from file, if you click on this button right here, you can see the entire workflow comes in, and then all you're gonna have to do is follow the setup guide in order to connect your own credentials to these different nodes. All right, and then the final thing I wanted to talk about is inactive versus active workflows. So you may have noticed that none of our executions actually counted up from 0, and the reason is because this is counting active workflow executions. And if we come up here to the top right, we can see that we have the ability to make a workflow active, but it has to have a trigger node that requires activation. So real quick, let's say that we come in here and we want a workflow to start when we have a schedule trigger. So I would go to schedule and I would basically say, okay, I want this to go off every single day at midnight as we have here. And what would happen is while this workflow is inactive, it's only actually going to run if we hit test workflow and then it runs. But if we were to flick this on as active, now it says your scheduled trigger will now trigger executions on the schedule you have defined. These executions will not show up immediately in the editor, but you can see them in the execution list. So this is basically saying two things. It's saying now that we have the scheduled trigger set up to run at midnight, it's actually going to run at midnight because it's active. If we left this inactive, it would not actually run. And all it meant by the second part is if we were sitting in this workflow at midnight, we wouldn't see it execute and go spinning and green and red in live real time, but it would still show up as an execution. But if it's an active workflow, you just don't get to see them live visually running and spinning anymore. So that's the difference between an active workflow and an inactive workflow. Let's say you have a trigger that's like, let's say you have a HubSpot trigger where you want this basically to fire off the workflow whenever a new contact is created. So you'd connect to HubSpot and you would make this workflow active so that it actually runs if a new contact's created. If you left this inactive, even though it says it's going to trigger on new contact, it would not actually do so unless this workflow was active. So that's a super important thing to remember. All right, and then one last thing I want to talk about, which we're not going to dive into because we'll see examples later, is there is one more way that we can see data rather than schema, table, or JSON, and it's something called binary. So binary basically just means an image or maybe a big PDF or a Word doc or a PowerPoint file. It's basically something that's not explicitly text-based. So let me show you exactly what that might look like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another trigger into this workflow, and I'm going to click on tab. And even though it doesn't say like what triggers this workflow, we can still access different triggers. So I'm just going to type in form, and this is going to give us a form submission that basically is an n8n native form. And you can see there's an option at the bottom for triggers. So I'm going to click on this trigger. Now, basically what this pulls up is another configuration panel, but obviously we don't have an input because it's a trigger, but we are going to get an output. So anyways, let me just set up a quick example form. I'm just going to say, the title of this form is demo. The description is binary data. And now what happens if I click on test step, it's going to pull up this form. And as you can see, we haven't set up like any fields for people to actually submit stuff. So the only option is to submit. But when I hit submit, you can see that the node has been executed. And now there's actually data in here submitted at with a timestamp. And then we have different information right here. So let me just show you guys, we can add a form element. And when I'm adding a form element, we can basically have this be, date, it can be a dropdown, it can be an email, it can be a file, it can be text. So real quick, I'm just going to show you an example where let's say we have a form where someone has to submit their name. We have the option to add a placeholder or make it required. And this isn't really the bulk of what I'm trying to show you guys. I just want to show you binary data. But anyways, let's say we're adding another field that's going to be a file. I'm just going to say file, and this will also be required. And now if I go ahead and hit test step, it's going to pull up a new form for us with a name parameter and a file parameter. So what I did is I put my name and I put in just a YouTube short that I had published, and you can see it's an MP4 file. So if I hit submit, we're going to get this data pulled into n8n, as you can see in the background. Just go ahead and watch. The form is going to actually capture this data. There you go, form submitted. And now what we see right here is binary data. So this is interesting, right? We still have our schema, we still have our table, we still have our JSON, but what this is showing us is basically, okay, the name that the person submitted was Nate. The file, here is some information about it as far as the name of it, the MIME type, and the size, but we don't actually access the file through table or JSON or schema view. The only way we can access a video file is through binary. And as you can see, if I clicked on view, it's my actual video file right here. And so that's all I really wanted to show you guys was when you're working with PDFs or images or videos, a lot of times they're going to come through as binary, which is a little confusing at first, but it's not too bad. And we will cover an example later in this tutorial where we look at a binary file and we process it. But as you can see now, if we were doing a next node, we would have schema, table, JSON, and binary. So we're still able to work with the binary. We're still able to reference it, but I just wanted to throw out there, when you see binary, don't get scared. It just basically means it's a different file type. It's not just text-based. Okay, so that's going to do it for just kind of setting up the foundational knowledge and getting familiar with the dashboard and the UI a little bit. And as you move into these next tutorials, which are going to be some step-by-steps, I'm going to walk through every single thing with you guys, setting up different accounts with Google and something called Pinecone, and we'll talk about all this stuff step by step. But hopefully now it's going to be a lot better moving into those sections because you've seen, some of the input stuff and how you configure nodes and just like all this terminology that you may not have been familiar with, like JSON, JavaScript variables, workflows, executions, that sort of stuff. So like I said, let's move into those actual step-by-step builds, and I can assure you guys you're going to feel a lot more comfortable after you have built a workflow end to end. All right, we're going to talk about data types in n8n and what those look like. It's really important to get familiar with this before we actually start automating things and building agents and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is just pull in a set node. As you guys know, this just lets us modify, add, or remove fields. And it's very, very simple. We basically would just click on this to add fields. We can add the name of the field, we choose the data type, and then we set the value, whether that's a fixed value, which we'll be looking at here, or if we're dragging in some sort of variable from the left-hand side. But clearly right now we have no data incoming. We just have a manual trigger. So what I'm going to do is zoom in on the actual browser so we can examine this data on the output a bit bigger, and I don't have to just keep cutting back and forth with the editing. So as you can see, there's 5 main data types that we have access to in n8n. We have string, which is basically just a fancy name for a word. As you can see, it's represented by a little a letter A. Then we have a number, which is represented by a pound sign or a hashtag, whatever you want to call it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then we have a Boolean, which is basically just going to be true or false. That's basically the only thing it can be, represented by a little checkbox. We have an array, which is just a fancy word for list, and we'll see exactly what this looks like. And then we have an object, which is probably the most confusing one, which basically means it's just this big block, which can have strings in them, numbers in them, it can have Booleans in them, it can have arrays in them, and it can also have nested objects within objects. So we'll take a look at that. Let's just start off real quick with the string. So let's say a string would be a name, and that would be my name. So if I hit test step, on the right-hand side in the JSON, it comes through as a key value pair, like we talked about. Name equals Nate. Super simple. You can tell it's a string because right here we have 2 quotes around the word Nate. So that represents a string. Or you could go to the schema, and you could see that with name equals Nate, there's the little letter A. And that basically says, okay, this is a string. As you see, it matches up right here. Cool. So that's a string. Let's switch over to a number. Now we'll just say we're looking at age, and we'll throw in the number 50, hit test step, and now we see age equals 50 with the pound sign right here as the symbol in the schema view. Or if we go to JSON view, we have the key value pair age equals 50, but now there are no double quotes around the actual number. It's green, so that's how we know it's not a string. This is a number. And that's where you may run into some issues where if you had like age coming through as a string, you wouldn't be able to like do any summarizations or filters. Like if age is greater than 50, send it off this way. If it's less than 50, send it that way. In order to do that type of filtering and routing, you would need to make sure that age is actually a number variable type or data type. Cool. So there's age. Let's go to a Boolean. So we're going to basically just say adult, and that can only be true or false. You see, I don't have the option to type anything here. It's only going to be false or it's only going to be true. And as you can see, it'll come through. It'll look like a string, but there's no quotes around it. It's green, and that's how we know it's a Boolean. Or we could go to schema, and we can see that there's a checkbox rather than the letter A symbol. Now we're going to move on to an array, and this one's interesting, right? So let's just say we want to have a list of names. So if I have a list of names, and I was typing in my name, and I tried to hit test step, this is where you would run into an error because it's basically saying, okay, the field called names, which we set right here, it's expecting to get an array, but all we got was Nate, which is basically a string. So to fix this error, change the type for the field names, or you can ignore type conversions, whatever. So if we were to come down to the option and ignore type conversions, so when we hit ignore type conversions and tested the step, it basically just converted the field called names to a string because it just could understand that this was a string rather than an array. So let's turn that back off and let's actually see how we could get this to work if we wanted to make an array. So like we know, an array just is a fancy word for a list. And in order for us to actually send through an n8n and say, okay, this is a list, we have to wrap it in square brackets like this. But we also have to wrap each item in the list in quotes. So I have to go like this and go like that. And now this would pass through as a list of different strings, and those are names. And so if I wanted to add another one, after the first item, I would put a comma, I'd put 2 quotes, and then inside that I could put another name, hit test step. And now you can see we're getting this array that's made up of different strings, and they're all going to be different names. So I could expand that, I could close it out, we could drag in different names. And in JSON, what that looks like is we have our key, and then we have 2 closed brackets, which is basically exactly what, like right here, this is exactly what we typed right here. So that's how it's being represented within these square brackets right here. Okay, cool. So the final one we have to talk about is an object, and this one's a little more complex. So if I was to hit test step here, it's going to tell us names expects an object, but we got an array. So once again, you could come in here, ignore type conversions, and then it would just basically come through as a string, but it's not coming through as an array. So that's not how we want to do it. And I don't want to mess with the actual like schema of typing in an object. So what I'm going to do is go to chat. I literally just said, give me an example JSON object to put into n8n. It gives me this example JSON object. I'm going to copy that, come into the set node, and instead of manual mapping, I'm just going to customize it with JSON, paste the one that chat just gave us. And when I hit test step, what we now see, first of all in the schema view, is we have one item with, this is an object, and all this different stuff makes it up. So we have a string, which is name Nate Herc. We have a string, which is email nate@example.com. We have a string, which is company, True Horizon AI. Then we have an array of interests within this object. So I could close this out, I could open it up, and we have 3 interests: AI automation, n8n, and YouTube content. And this is, ChatGPT's long-term memory about me making this. And then we also have an object within our object, which is called project. And the interesting difference here with an object or an array is that when you have an array of interests, every single item in that array is going to be called interest 0, interest 1, interest 2. And by the way, this is 3 interests, but computers start counting from 0, so that's why it says 0, 1, 2. But with an object, it doesn't all have to be the same thing. So you can see in this project object, we have one string called title, we have one string called status, and we have one string called deadline. And this all makes up its own object, as you can see. If we went to table view, this is literally just one item that's really easy to read, and you can tell that this is an array because it goes 0, 1, 2, and you can tell that this is an object because it has different fields in it. This is one item, it's one object, it's got strings up top, it has no numbers actually, so the date right here, this is coming through as a string variable type. We can tell because it's not green, we can tell because it has double quotes around it, and we can also tell because in schema it comes through with the letter A. But this is just how you can see there's these different things that make up this object, and you can even close them down in JSON view. We can see interest is an array that has 3 items. We can open that up. We can see project is an object because it's wrapped in curly braces, not the closed square brackets, as you can see. So there's a difference, and I know this wasn't super detailed, and it's just something really, really important to know heading into when you actually start to build stuff out, because you're probably going to get some of those errors where you're like, blank expects an object but got this, or expects an array and got this. So just wanted to make sure I came in here and threw that module at you guys, and hopefully it'll save you some headaches down the road. Real quick guys, if you want to be able to download all the resources from this video, they'll be available for free in my free school community, which will be the link in the pinned comment. There'll be a zip file in there that has all 23 of these workflows, as you can see, and also 2 PDFs at the bottom, which are covered in the video. So like I said, join the free school community. Not only does it have all of my YouTube resources, but it's also a really quick growing community of people who are obsessed with AI automation and using n8n every day. All you'll have to do is search for the title of this video using the search bar, or you can click on YouTube resources and find the post associated with this video, and then you'll have the zip file right here to download, which once again is going to have all 23 of these JSON n8n workflows and 2 PDFs. And there may even be some bonus files in here. You'll just have to join the free school community to find out. Okay, so we talked about AI agents, we talked about AI workflows, we've gotten into n8n and set up our account. We understand workflows, nodes, triggers, JSON, stuff like that, and data types. Now it's time to use all that stuff that we've talked about and start applying it. So we're going to head into this next portion of this course, which is going to be about step-by-step builds, where I'm going to walk you through every single step live, and we'll have some pretty cool workflows set up by the end. So let's get into it. Today, we're going to be looking at 3 simple AI workflows that you can build right now to get started learning n8n. We're going to walk through everything step by step, including all of the credentials and the setups. So let's take a look at the 3 workflows we're going to be building today. All right, the first one is going to be a RAG pipeline and chatbot. And if you don't know what RAG means, don't worry, we're going to explain it all. But at a high level, what we're doing is we're going to be using Pinecone as a vector database. If you don't know what a vector database is, we'll break it down. We're going to be using Google Drive, we're going to be using Google Docs, and then something called Open Router, which lets us connect to a bunch of different AI models like OpenAI's models or Anthropic's models. The second workflow we're going to look at is a customer support workflow that's kind of going to be building off of the first one we just built. Because in the first workflow, we're going to be putting data into a Pinecone vector database, and in this one, we're going to use that data in there in order to respond to customer support related emails. So we'll already have had Pinecone set up, but we're going to set up our credentials for Gmail, and then we're also going to be using an n8n AI agent, as well as Open Router once again. And then finally, we're going to be doing LinkedIn content creation. And in this one, we'll be using an n8n AI agent and Open Router once again, but we'll have 2 new credentials to set up. The first one being Tavily, which is going to let us search the web. And then the second one will be Google Sheets, where we're going to store our content ideas, pull them in, and then have the content written back to that Google Sheet. So by the end of this video, you're going to have 3 workflows set up, and you're going to have a really good foundation to continue to learn more about n8n. You'll already have gotten a lot of credentials set up and understand what goes into connecting to different services. One of the trickiest being Google. So we'll walk through that step by step, and then you'll have it configured and you'll be good. And then from there, you'll be able to continuously build on top of these 3 workflows that we're going to walk through together, because there's really no such thing as a finished product in this space. Different AI models keep getting released and keep getting better. There's always ways to improve your templates. And the cool thing about building workflows in n8n is that you can make them super customized for exactly what you're looking for. So if this sounds good to you, let's hop into that first workflow. Okay, so for this first workflow, we're building a RAG pipeline and chatbot. And so if that sounds like a bunch of gibberish to you, let's quickly understand what RAG is and what a vector database is. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And in the simplest terms, let's say you ask me a question and I don't actually know the answer. I would just kind of Google it, and then I would get the answer from my phone, and then I would tell you the answer. So in this case, when we're building a RAG chatbot, we're going to be asking the chatbot questions, and it's not going to know the answer, so it's going to look inside our vector database, find the answer, and then it's going to respond to us. And so when we're combining the elements of RAG with a vector database, here's how it works. So the first thing we want to talk about is actually what is a vector database. So essentially, this is what a vector database would look like. We're all familiar with like an X and Y axis graph where you can plot points on there on a 2-dimensional plane, but a vector database is a multi-dimensional graph of points. So in this case, you can see this multi-dimensional space with all these different points or vectors. And each vector is placed based on the actual meaning of the word or words in the vector. So over here, you can see we have wolf, dog, and cat, and they're placed similarly because the meaning of these words are all like animals. Whereas over here we have apple and banana, which the meaning of the words are food, more likely fruits, and that's why they're placed over here together. So when we're searching through the database, we basically vectorize a question the same way we would vectorize any of these other points. And in this case, we were asking for a kitten, and then that query gets placed over here near the other animals, and then we're able to say, okay, well, we have all these results now. So what that looks like, and what we'll see when we get into n8n, is we have a document that we want to vectorize. We have to split the document up into chunks because we can't put like a 50-page PDF as one chunk. So it gets split up, and then we're going to run it through something called an embeddings model, which basically just turns text into numbers. Just as simple as that. And as you can see in this case, let's say we had a document about a company. We have company data, finance data, and marketing data. And they all get placed differently because they mean different things. And the context of those chunks are different. And then this visual down here is just kind of how an LLM, or in this case, this agent, takes our question, turns it into its own question. We vectorize that using the same embeddings model that we used up here to vectorize the original data. And then, because it gets placed here, it just grabs back any vectors that are nearest, maybe like the nearest 4 or 5, and then it brings it back in order to respond to us. So don't want to dive too much into this, don't want to overcomplicate it, but hopefully this all makes sense. Cool, so now that we understand that, let's actually start building this workflow. So what we're going to do here is we are going to click on Add First Step, because every workflow needs a trigger that basically starts the workflow. So I'm going to type in Google Drive, because what we're going to do is we are going to pull in a document from our Google Drive in order to vectorize it. So I'm going to choose a trigger, which is on changes involving a specific folder. And what we have to do now is connect our account. As you can see, I'm already connected, but what we're gonna do is click on create new credential in order to connect our Google Drive account. And what we have to do is go get a client ID and a secret. So what we wanna do is click on open docs, which is gonna bring us to n8n's documents on how to set up this credential. We have a prerequisite, which is creating a Google Cloud account. So I'm gonna click on Google Cloud account and we're gonna set up a new project. Okay, so I just signed into a new account and I'm gonna set up a whole project and walk through the credentials with you guys. You'll click up here. You'll probably have something up here that says like new project, and then you'll click into new project. All we have to do now is name it, and you'll be able to start for free, so don't worry about that yet. So I'm just gonna name this one demo, and I'm going to create this new project. And now up here in the top right, you're gonna see that it's kind of spinning up this project, and then we'll move forward. Okay, so it's already done, and now I can select this project. So now you can see up here, I'm in my new project called demo. I'm gonna click on these 3 lines in the top left, and what we're gonna do first is go to APIs and services and click on enabled APIs and services. And what we wanna do is add the ones we need. And so right now, all I'm gonna do is add Google Drive. And you can see it's gonna come up with Google Drive API. And then all we have to do is really simply click enable. And there we go, I just enabled it, so you can see here the status is enabled. And now we have to set up something called our OAuth consent screen, which basically is just going to let n8n know that Google Drive and n8n are allowed to talk to each other and have permissions. So right here, I'm gonna click on OAuth consent screen. We don't have one yet, so I'm gonna click on get started. I'm gonna give it a name, so we're just gonna call this one demo. Once again, I'm gonna add a support email. I'm gonna click on next. Because I'm not using a Google Workspace account, I'm just using a, nateherc88@gmail.com. I'm gonna have to choose external. I'm gonna click on next. For contact information, I'm putting the same email as I used to create this whole project. Click on next and then agree to terms, and then we're going to create that OAuth consent screen. Okay, so we're not done yet. The next thing we want to do is we want to click on audience, and we're going to add ourselves as a test user. So we could also make the app published by publishing it right here, but I'm just going to keep it in test. And when we keep it in test mode, we have to add a test user. So I'm going to put in that same email from before, and this is going to be the email of the Google Drive we want to access. So I put in my email, you can see I saved it down here, and then finally all we need to do is come back into here, go to clients, and then we need to create a new client. We're gonna click on web app. We're gonna name it whatever we want, of course. I'm just gonna call this one demo once again. And now we need to basically add a redirect URI. So if you click back into n8n, we have one right here. So we're gonna copy this, go back into cloud, and we're gonna add a URI and paste it right in there, and then hit create. And then once that's created, it's gonna give us an ID and a secret. So all we have to do is copy the ID, go back into n8n and paste that right here. And then we need to go grab our secret from Google Cloud and then paste that right in there. And now we have a little button that says sign in with Google. So I'm gonna open that up. It's gonna pull up a window to have you sign in. Make sure you sign in with the same account that you just had yourself as a test user, that one. And then you'll have to continue. And then here's basically saying like, what permissions do we have? Does n8n have to your Google Drive? So I'm just gonna select all. I'm gonna hit continue, and then we should be good. Connection successful, and we are now connected. And you may just wanna rename this credential so you know which email it is. So now I've saved my credential, and we should be able to access the Google Drive now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on this list, and it's gonna show me the folders that I have in Google Drive. So that's awesome. Now for the sake of this video, I'm in my Google Drive, and I'm gonna create a new folder. So new folder, we're gonna call this one FAQ. Create this one because we're going to be uploading an FAQ document into it. So here's my FAQ folder right here. And then what I have is down here, I made a policy and FAQ document, which looks like this. We have some store policies, and then we also have some FAQs at the bottom. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in my policy and FAQ document into that new FAQ folder. And then if we come into n8n, we click on the new folder that we just made. So it's not here yet. I'm just going to click on these dots and click on refresh list. Now we should see the FAQ folder. There it is. Click on it. We're going to click on what are we watching this folder for. I'm going to be watching for a file created, and then I'm just going to hit fetch test event. And now we can see that we did in fact get something back. So let's make sure this is the right one. Yep, so there's a lot of nasty information coming through. I'm going to switch over here on the right hand side. This is where we can see the output of every node. I'm going to click on table, and I'm just going to scroll over, and there should be a field called file name. Here it is, name, and we have policy and FAQ document. So we know we have the right document in our Google Drive. Okay, so perfect. Every time we drop in a new file into that Google folder, it's going to start this workflow. And now we just have to configure what happens after the workflow starts. So all we want to do really is we want to pull this data into n8n so that we can put it into our Pinecone database. So off of this trigger, I'm going to add a new node, and I'm going to grab another Google Drive node, because what happened is basically we have the file ID and the file name, but we don't have the contents of the file. So we're going to do a download file node from Google Drive. I'm going to rename this one and just call it download file, just to keep ourselves organized. We already have our credential connected, and now it's basically saying, what file do you want to download? We have the ability to choose from a list, but if we choose from the list, it's going to be this file every time we run the workflow. And we want to make this dynamic. So we're going to change from list to by ID. And all we have to do now is we're going to look on the left-hand side for that file that we just pulled in, and we're going to be looking for the ID of the file. So I can see that I found it right down here in the